The remainder of the day was a sort of blur until meeting with Tom in the evening. He and I were invited inside by Hilda for tea and biscuits. She was interested to hear about the return of my sister. Hilda was a good listener. She sat stroking her dog as I talked in an excited way about Brana. The woman offered me some words of caution. What Hilda said had been knocking around in my head, but hearing someone express these concerns brought them into sharp focus. She warned that Brana may well have suffered severe traumas that could manifest at any time, plus the psychological and emotional shock of being released from captivity after so many years could trigger panics or feelings of terror. It must be true that our home was somehow alien to my sibling now, but I was confident that she would find the strength to come through this trial with the unwavering support of myself and mother. Tom agreed with Hilda that I should keep a watchful eye on my dear sister. I had a mind to bring her with me to the allotments sometime. It occurred to me that perhaps she would find a bit of gardening to be therapeutic, as I did. I would put the idea to her and see if it got a warm reaction. Later, as Tom and I lay in bed together, our warm bodies intertwined, we spoke about how I might tell my sister about our relationship. I had no idea how she would react. I hoped deeply that she would be accepting, of course. But I had never heard Brana as a younger woman express any bigoted views. She was not the sort of person to deal in lazy generalizations or go along with the herd. She took people as individuals. This was the woman I knew. However, I naturally had my doubts. As Tom reminded me, sometimes you have to be vulnerable, and it requires bravery to expose yourself to possible harm. I returned home that night to find Brana asleep on the sofa. I tiptoed to my room and stealthily got into bed. I had found my dear sibling crying and sat alone in the living room every day of her first week back, but I was able to get her out of the apartment at the third time of asking, when she finally agreed to come with me as I ran my afternoon errands. She wasn't keen on the allotments idea, as it turned out. I introduced her to several of the old folks on my rounds, two of whom said they remembered my sister. She couldn't remember them, however, for which she apologised. Conversations were kept light, and I sensed that this was doing her some good. On the Sunday we attended church together. I asked if she wanted to come on the previous evening, and she immediately agreed. I was a little surprised by this. Tom and I almost always went to Sunday services. It might be regarded as suspicious if one didn't. I saw this as an opportunity to introduce myself and Tom to my sister as a couple. To my delight, there seemed to be chemistry between Brana and Tom as they made small talk before the service. After the service, the minister, Brandon Clark, approached me, something he rarely did, and asked how Brana was doing. He said he would like to speak with her privately sometime soon. I said I would let her know and get back to him. He thanked me before going over to Brana and Tom for a brief "Hello, how are you?" It was that night that we sat as three people, Tom, Brana and I, and it felt like family. Getting the revelation off my chest was like lifting a huge weight. Yeah. And Brana said, "I can see why you like that Tom fella," while Tom was in the toilet. "He's a lucky man, I think," added Brana. She looked me straight in the eyes and smiled widely. She then leaned forward and kissed me full on the lips. We embraced for several minutes. It was the most liberating of moments. When I told my dear sibling of Minister Clarke's desire for a private audience, she rolled her eyes in a knowing fashion. "He'll want to coach me, I assume. I'll go and see him tomorrow." I wasn't sure what she meant. I felt pressing her for more information wasn't wise. I did, however, offer to go with her, but she declined, saying it was best that she went alone. She actually visited him twice on successive days. On her return home after the second visit, she informed me that I should go and visit Clarke before my patrol duties that evening. I arrived at the rectory filled with apprehension. I was welcomed inside by Clarke's wife Emily. She was a polite yet cold lady. She soon disappeared and left the minister and I alone. He began to talk about Brana and her road to redemption. I soon got the idea of what this servant of God was up to. He wished to use my sister as a shining example of Pride and Homeland's glorious and gracious rule. She would stand before the congregation in a couple of days' time and let the people see the benevolence of the party. Here was another saved soul standing before the people. That's how this was to play out. Clarke was well aware of my discomfort as he laid his plan out. The minister then changed the subject quite abruptly. At first I couldn't tell where he was going, as he spoke of the sinfulness of man in the general sense. Then he began to speak of ungodly sexual desire and how this led to degeneracy and disease. He made reference to Tom and the tragic death of his young wife. He turned his gaze away from me and stared out of the window into his vast and lush garden. He asked me frankly why I'd never married. I gave the same somewhat predictable answer I would say to people I ran deliveries for. He said it was a shame I hadn't yet found the right lady. Clarke then uttered, "It must be nice to have a close friend who understands you, as you do him, I'm sure." It was clear that he knew about, or was deeply suspicious of, Tom and I. He looked me over briefly before showing me to the door, as I did my very best to maintain composure. I told him he could expect me and my sister on Sunday, front and centre. He smiled in a genuinely sinister way, and wished me a good day. After the first hymn, Clarke gave what might have sounded like a heartfelt introduction to Brana, who waited by his side. He offered her the stand. There she stood in her Sunday best, the eyes of the community upon her. She began her speech. "Men, women, and children of Pretania, the Lord knows we are all sinners. Perhaps I've sinned more than most. As a young woman, I was incarcerated for the protection of this very community. I can swear to you, with complete sincerity, with God as my witness, that in all my years in the care of the state I was never once mistreated. On not one single occasion was I abused by the loyal servants of Pride and Homeland. On the contrary, I was shown nothing but love, the love of a strong hand guiding me." She paused briefly to look sideways at Clarke before continuing, "The love of the Church as my light against the darkness." She faced front and carried on with the scripted performance. "The state took an angry and confused woman, a wretch, and slowly turned her to the light of truth. These were the actions of a loving regime. Sovereign Pretania exists because of the bravery of Pride and Homeland. We owe our loyalty and our very lives to the party. God is with the revolution. The revolution is with the people. No righteous soul could stand against sovereign Pretania. Only the wicked seek to destroy that which is good and pure. We are blessed to have the Honourable Minister Clark as a community leader. He is a rock of faith in these trying times. We must listen to his words of wisdom and follow by his wonderful example. I thank you all, brothers and sisters. Long live Supreme Director Marshall. With this, she was ushered back to her seat next to me and Tom. I held her hand and did my best to hold it together. I could feel a quiet rage building in my sister. Clark thanked Brana for her words and went on with the service, which lasted for another hour. Brana was asked to stay behind afterwards by one of Clark's assistants. I asked Brana if she wanted me to wait for her, but she told me to go home. This I did after I'd said farewell to Tom. When I got home, Mum had dinner almost ready. It wasn't 5 minutes after I'd gotten through the door that Brana came in looking flustered. I thought it best not to ask why. We all ate a lovely dinner together. It almost felt like old times, if only Dad had been there. Mother's health was improving visibly. To me, it was clear that her daughter's presence was having a positive effect. A few days after that Sunday, Brana told me what had happened after Clark made her stay back in the church. Clark was apparently very pleased with his girl's performance. He decided that she deserved a reward. He took her into the confessional cabinet and ordered her to strip down to her underwear. He made her go down on her knees and close her eyes. The good minister then forced his manhood into Brana's mouth and instructed her to recite the Lord's Prayer as she gave him fellatio. Brana spoke of her treatment and that of her fellow prisoners at the hands of visiting clergy down the years. This recounting was sad but not shocking. I felt disgust and anger naturally. I could see that my dear sister was deeply wounded, but not broken. Something was changing in Pretania. The future quite suddenly seemed uncertain in a way it hadn't before. Tom was not an avid reader of the Patriot Times, but he had picked up a copy on Wednesday to show me what he felt I needed to see. The paper told of a new detention facility being established somewhere near the capital. Persecution of perceived opponents and undesirables was nothing new, but this was no normal cycle of repression. Certain prominent party members, military officers, had been arrested and named in a coup plot against Marshall. It was said that these so-called traitors had been conspiring with the government of Gormanica. Details of the coup were pretty thin. It was impossible to verify the truth of any of this. The state propaganda broadsheet was also full of praise for the tremendous work being done by the church to help the less fortunate. There was mention of a network of ungodly liars who had made it their mission to slander the clergy. People were admonished not to help spread dangerous rumours and remain steadfast in loyalty to pride and homeland. Were we now seeing in nightly broadcasts a shift in mood and tone? I think we were. One could sense the insecurity of the regime. Calls for greater social unity were accompanied by calls for calm. We hadn't seen or heard of any protests, but that didn't mean it wasn't happening. My guess was that the party was dealing with a crisis of confidence. Had they revealed too much to the public? Did they now fear the possibility of an uprising? Even the Farrells, the television family, began to change their tone somewhat. One scene had them sitting around a table discussing recent events. The father took charge, of course, telling his wife and kids to trust in Marshall and God as they trust in their benevolent patriarch. It was sickening stuff. On the Saturday, we were told that Gormanica, that devious continental power, had dropped thousands upon thousands of letters on our capital city, calling for the people to rebel. Good citizens were instructed to hand these in at local police stations. Talking heads of the regime suggested a possible strategy by the pigs of Gormanica to weaken Pretanian morale and unity, thus paving the way for invasion. Then we were treated to colourful descriptions of the behaviour of Gormanican troops in that country's previous wars. This was clearly aimed at terrifying the population. The barbarian hordes of Gormanica were salivating at the prospect of looting and raping their way across our nation, according to our leadership. After we had turned the set off that night, myself and Bronner speculated that we might be witnessing an oppressive order in its death throes. Was this the beginning of the end? I recalled Mother's words. Had those seeds of destruction grown into toxic weeds, which would soon strangle pride and homeland? Or was I perhaps guilty of wishful thinking? As I lay in bed that night, I wondered what the man next door, or the woman down the street, might be thinking. What did the people one town over from us make of recent developments? Did they feel scared that their world was about to implode? Or did they feel emboldened? Was years of rage and resentment about to explode onto the streets? At dawn, the following morning, I heard loud rapping at our door. Looking out of my window, I could see 3 men in party uniform. I glanced up the street and could see uniformed men at many a door. I opened up and was greeted with a smile and a "Good morning, sir." What could all this be about?